Story number 1, Substation 14. I arrived at the substation on the afternoon of November 14th for a routine quarterly maintenance review. The installation operates above 700 kilovolt capacity and sits approximately 43 miles from the nearest town. The access road had been maintained recently enough. The perimeter fence was intact. The site supervisor met me at the gate. His name was Garrett. He seemed distracted, mentioning that 2 technicians had called in sick that morning and that the third had left mid-shift without explanation. I asked if there had been equipment failures or alerts. He said no. Everything was nominal. He said it anyway, which was unusual. Most supervisors don't volunteer reassurance without being asked. I conducted the initial walkthrough alone. All transformer housings showed normal thermal signatures. The capacitor banks registered within expected parameters. The grounding array tested clean, but the ambient sound level was wrong. The substation should produce a constant mechanical variation. The hum of transformers, the occasional relay click, the subtle cycling of cooling systems. Instead, the sound was uniform, flat, like a recording played at low volume. I noted this in my field log and continued. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, I observed that the shadow cast by the primary transformer array did not align with the sun's position. The sun was approximately 28 degrees above the western horizon. The shadow fell toward magnetic north, regardless of the angle from which I viewed it. I moved to different positions around the yard. The shadow remained fixed. I attempted to photograph the discrepancy per documentation protocol. I used my field camera and my personal phone. I took 6 exposures from different distances and angles. When I reviewed the images on site, every photograph showed the shadows in their correct positions, aligned with the sun's actual bearing. But when I looked away from the screen and back at the yard itself, the misalignment was still there. I found Garrett in the equipment shed and brought him to the location. I asked him to observe the shadow cast by the primary array. He looked at it for approximately 30 seconds. He said it looked normal. He said all the shadows looked normal. I pointed to the specific area. He said I was looking at it wrong, that the sun was lower than I thought, that my eyes were playing tricks. His voice was steady. He wasn't defensive. He simply stated it as fact. Radio contact with regional dispatch began producing delayed responses. When I transmitted a routine status update at 16:40, 5 hours, my words returned to me approximately 3 seconds after I spoke them. Not an echo, a response. The dispatcher acknowledged my transmission, but the timing was wrong. I tested it again. Same delay. I asked dispatch if they were experiencing technical issues. The response came back negative. All systems nominal. The delay was still there. At 1700 hours, the misaligned shadow began extending across the gravel yard independent of the sun's movement. The sun was now below the horizon. The shadow continued to lengthen and move, always toward magnetic north, always in the wrong direction. It moved slowly, but visibly. I watched it for 4 minutes. It advanced approximately 2 meters across the yard. I made the decision to implement evacuation protocol without clearance authorization. This violated standard procedure, but the situation had moved beyond the scope of routine maintenance review. I informed Garrett that we were leaving the facility. He refused. He said all equipment readings remained normal. He said there was no emergency condition. He said the shadow was nothing. I told him I was evacuating and that he should follow. He did not move. I last saw him standing approximately 3 meters ahead of the shadow's leading edge, watching the yard with an expression I could not read. His hands were at his sides. I cleared the security perimeter at 17:20, 2 hours, and drove to the nearest town, arriving at 21:40 hours. I reported the incident to the local sheriff's office and requested emergency response to the substation. The sheriff contacted Regional Dispatch directly. Regional Dispatch arrived 6 hours later. They found the facility operating within normal parameters. All equipment readings were nominal. The supervisor was absent. No record of his employment existed in the site database. The facility logs showed no one had been assigned to the location for the previous 8 days. I was transported to a medical facility in Missoula for psychological evaluation. The examination lasted 4 hours. I was cleared for duty. I was reassigned to urban distribution oversight in the Seattle metropolitan area, effective immediately. No further contact was made regarding the November 14th incident. My field report was submitted through standard channels on November 15th. It was received and logged. No follow-up questions were asked. No additional investigation was conducted. No formal closure was issued. The incident file was archived on December 2nd, 2024, and I was instructed not to discuss it with any personnel outside of direct supervisory channels. That instruction remains in effect. Story number 2, processing delay. I was assigned to overnight intake processing at the temporary holding facility outside Laredo. The facility was a 72-hour detention center operated under emergency protocols, and my role was standard log arrivals, conduct preliminary medical screenings, prepare transfer documentation, and maintain order during the night shift. I had been doing this work for 4 years across 3 states, and the routine had become automatic. The transport van arrived at 11:30, 2 in the evening. 14 adult males, all cooperative during initial processing. They came through intake in the standard sequence: photograph, vital signs, brief medical questionnaire, property inventory, cell assignment. Most were responsive and compliant. One was not. He was the last to arrive at the processing desk. The transport officer noted in the handoff that he had been quiet the entire drive, no incidents, no resistance. He would not make eye contact with anyone. When I asked his name, he did not respond. When I asked where he was from, he did not respond. He simply stood at the desk with his eyes fixed downward and waited for whatever came next. The nurse, Patricia, conducted his medical screening. She took his temperature 3 times, 94.3 degrees. She marked it as equipment error and noted it in the file. His blood pressure was normal. Pulse was normal. No visible injuries. No identifying documents. No medical alerts. She asked if he had any allergies or medications. He did not answer. She moved him through the screening and handed him off to me. I placed him in holding cell 7 with 3 other detainees. The cell was standard, 8 by 10 feet, concrete floor, metal bunk frame, stainless steel toilet, fluorescent light. The 3 men already in the cell seemed indifferent to his arrival. I locked the door at 2300 hours and made my first round of the holding block. Within 20 minutes, the men in cell 7 were at the door. They were banging on it and shouting. I responded immediately. They said the new man was not moving. They said he was standing in the corner facing the wall, and he was not moving. They said he was not breathing. I told them to step back from the door. I opened cell 7 and looked at him. He was in the far corner, facing the wall, his arms at his sides. I called to him. He did not respond. I stepped closer. His shoulders moved. His head turned toward me, but his body did not turn. His neck rotated, and his head faced me, while his torso remained fixed against the corner. His eyes were completely black, not dark brown, not dilated pupils, completely black, no whites, no iris definition, just uniform darkness from edge to edge. I stepped back and closed the cell door. I radioed for my supervisor. The radio produced only static. I tried the landline in the office. The call would not connect. I tried again. No connection. I moved the 3 men from cell 7 to separate holding cells in the adjacent block. I sealed cell 7 and posted a note on the door indicating it was out of service pending maintenance review. This was not standard procedure, but I had no supervisor to consult and no communication with anyone outside the facility. Over the next 4 hours, detainees in cells adjacent to 7 reported hearing whispers. They described the sound as voices speaking in a language none of them recognized. 2 guards refused to walk past cell 7 during their rounds. Both claimed the temperature dropped significantly within 3 feet of the door. I checked the thermometer mounted in the corridor. It read normal. I did not verify their claim directly. At 0400 hours, I conducted a routine observation check. I looked through the cell window. The cell was empty. The bunk was empty. The floor was empty. The corner where he had been standing was empty. The door had not been opened. The electronic lock showed no breach. The camera footage for cell 7 displayed only uninterrupted static from 300 hours onward. I documented this in my report. I noted the time, the observation, and the status of the door and lock. I did not speculate about what had occurred. My supervisor arrived at 0600 hours for shift change. I handed him my written report and the intake log. He read both. He made 2 phone calls from his office. I was not permitted to hear the conversations. When he finished, he called me in and instructed me to remove all references to cell 7 from the intake log. He instructed me to remove the note from the cell door. He instructed me to remove my observation report from the file. He said the cell would be marked as maintenance closure effective immediately, and that no further documentation would be recorded regarding the detainee or the cell. I complied. I removed the entries. I filed the documents according to his instruction. The facility was listed for emergency maintenance closure 6 days later. No reason was given. All detainees were transferred to other facilities. All staff were reassigned. I was transferred to administrative processing in El Paso. My personnel file contained a notation indicating specialized assignment consideration. I have not been recalled for such assignment. I have not been asked about the incident. I have not submitted any additional reports. The incident was closed and archived. No further action is required. Story number 3, Cam 7. I was assigned to audit the physical evidence from the Stone Mountain case on a Tuesday morning in late February. The victim's name was Margaret Hollis. She had been missing since March 1997, and the case had gone cold within 6 months. My job was straightforward: verify that all cataloged items matched the physical evidence box, photograph everything for the digital migration project, and sign off on condition and chain of custody. Routine work. I had done it hundreds of times in my 12 years with the evidence division. The box arrived from storage on a Wednesday. I opened it in my office on the 3rd floor of headquarters, laid out the contents on the examination table, and began my checklist. A blue cotton blouse, size 8. A leather purse, brown, scuffed. A pair of white sneakers worn at the heel. 3 photographs, color, showing a woman in her early 30s with dark hair and a neutral expression. A watch with a stopped face. A set of keys on a brass ring. And then the driver's licenses. There were 7 of them in a manila envelope at the bottom of the box. I removed them carefully and arranged them in front of me. All Georgia State issue. All bearing the name Margaret Ellen Hollis. All with the same photograph, or what appeared to be the same photograph, though I noticed even then that something about her expression seemed to shift slightly, depending on the angle of the light. The issue dates were what stopped me. The first was dated March of 1993. The next was April of 1994. Then June of 1995. September of 1996. December of 1996. February of 1997. And the last one was dated March of 1997, the month she disappeared. I checked the case file. The original investigating officer, Detective Raymond Voss, had noted only 1 license recovered from the victim's purse at the time of the initial evidence collection. 1 license, not 7. I photographed each one according to protocol, placing them on the standard measurement grid and taking images from above under the examination lights. When I reviewed the photographs on my computer, I noticed that the woman's face in each image showed a different expression. In the first photograph, she looked uncertain. In the second, almost resigned. By the 7th, her eyes appeared to be looking directly at the camera lens, directly at me, with something I would not characterize as emotion, because I am trained not to characterize, but rather to observe and record. I called Detective Voss on Thursday morning. He had retired in 2005 and was living in Alpharetta. When I described the licenses, there was a long silence on the line. He said, "There was 1 license. I collected it myself." I told him I had 7 in front of me. He said, "You need to stop looking at those." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I'm not discussing this," and hung up. I called back twice. He did not answer. I returned to the evidence room on Friday evening after the building had emptied. I wanted to examine the licenses again under different conditions, without the overhead fluorescence. I brought a desk lamp and a magnifying glass. I laid the 7 licenses out and studied them for 2 hours. The security features were correct. The control numbers were sequential and matched the state's issuance records for that period. The lamination was genuine. Under the magnifying glass, I could see the individual dots of the half-dome printing, consistent with legitimate state production. But when I looked up from the magnifying glass and observed the licenses without magnification, the arrangement had changed. They were no longer in chronological order. They had been rearranged into a pattern I did not recognize, a kind of spiral formation radiating from the center of the table. I placed them back in chronological order and left the building. On Saturday, I returned during business hours and repeated the examination. The licenses were still in chronological order. I photographed them again. In the new photographs, the woman's expression had changed in every single image. She was no longer looking at the camera. She was looking away, or down, or to the side, as if she had moved between the moment each license was issued and the moment I captured the image. On Sunday night, I went back alone. I brought a notebook and began to count. I counted 7 licenses. I arranged them in order. I documented each control number. I left the building at 11:45 in the evening. On Monday morning, I opened the evidence box and found 12 licenses. On Tuesday, I found 18. On Wednesday, I found 24 arranged in neat rows inside the box, each one perfectly aligned with the others, each one bearing Margaret Hollis's name and a different expression on her face. That night, I did not go to the evidence room. I sat at my desk on the 3rd floor and reviewed the case file again. Detective Voss's original report was sparse. The victim had been reported missing by her employer on March 10, 1997. She had not reported to work since March 8th. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her car was found in the parking lot of a hiking trail near Stone Mountain. No body was recovered. The case was suspended in June of 1997 due to lack of leads. I opened my desk drawer to retrieve the department's restricted internal memo pad, the kind used only for sensitive communications. I needed to document what I was observing, to create an official record that something was wrong with this evidence. Beneath the memo pad, I found a handwritten note in my own handwriting. The note was dated February 16, 2023. That was 2 weeks before I had received the assignment. The note read, "Stop counting. Close the case. Do not return to the evidence room. File contamination report and request destruction." This is the only way it stops. I had not written that note. I had not written anything on February 16th. I had been home that day. I remembered it clearly. I had been alone. The ink was from the restricted pad. The paper was restricted stock. The handwriting was mine. I filed the contamination report on Thursday morning. I documented humidity damage to the evidence box, potential mold exposure to the physical items, and structural degradation of the materials due to improper storage conditions. I recommended immediate destruction of the contents and case closure based on evidence integrity compromise. I did not mention the licenses. I did not mention the photographs. I did not mention the note. The case was administratively closed within 48 hours. My report was accepted without review. The evidence box was transferred to the scheduled destruction facility on Friday afternoon. On Monday of the following week, I was reassigned to the Financial Crimes Evidence Processing Unit on the 5th floor. My supervisor, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, informed me that the reassignment was routine, part of a departmental rotation. She did not explain why I had been selected or why the reassignment had been processed so quickly. I have not returned to the 3rd floor. I have not reviewed the Stone Mountain case file again. I have not attempted to contact Detective Voss. The file is closed. The evidence is destroyed. The case is archived.